because back then it was a smaller population, and there was only X number of family doctors, and there was Dr. Brennan, Dr. Hay, and Dr. So it's not surprised a lot of people go, "Oh, Ted, yeah, your dad was our doctor," and I've very touching comments. He was the best doctor we ever had.
So you moved in 56?
56, May 1st, we moved to Pointe-Claire.
Where were you living before that?
Ottawa.
Oh, Ottawa.
Yeah, my parents are both from the Ottawa area. Ottawa, my dad was from downtown, my mom was from a little town called Carp, just west of Ottawa. My dad was going to McGill. He was a doctor. He went to McGill in the early 40s, got a BSc. My mother and him got married in 43, enlisted in the Air Force right away, and then he got sent over to England on a boat in 1940, early 45.
Early 45?
Yeah, he only went, and I still don't know.
How many months were left?
His boat arrived in Liverpool the week before VE Day, Victory in Europe. And he didn't come back until early 46. So he came back and re-enlisted in McGill in medicine. When I was born, he was in his last year, third or fourth year of medicine at McGill. And we lived in Lachine. There was a place called Peterson Residence. It was former military barracks. McGill had a thing for returning servicemen who were, undergraduates.
Yeah.
If they were married and had families and they'd served, they got to live in these residences. The year after he graduated, he went back to Ottawa to intern for a year, and then we moved. Then he took a job in northern British Columbia for a year as the only doctor at an RCAF Air Force base. And then we moved to North Bay, Ontario for 2 years. He worked in a clinic there. Then we moved back to Ottawa for a year while he interned one more year. And then he got a job in Montreal working for a drug company. That's when they bought our first home on Fairhaven in Pointe-Claire.
Did you ever ask the question, why Pointe-Claire? What was the appeal to Pointe-Claire? Or what would be your guess?
That's a good question. I don't know. My guess is that they did some research, whether other people who lived here said, well, this is a good suburban area for a young family.
Growing, developing, brand new.
And what happened next in our case, my dad was a doctor, but he was working for a company as sales rep. Within a year of us moving here, he discovered that this company was, unbeknownst to him, putting his signature and name on testimonials for some of their products. Yeah. And he came home and in so many words, and my mother told me this story years later, even maybe after my father was gone. He basically quit and came home, and because this is wrong. And he apparently in so many words said to her, honey, I quit, let's go home, meaning let's sell, let's go home to the Ottawa area. And my mother, in so many words, said, well, can we not stay? It was our first home we've owned. We have nice neighbors, it's a nice neighborhood, there's schools, there's churches. And he said, okay, and he was a medical doctor, he never practiced as a doctor. So he basically put a post in the front lawn. I brought his newspaper clipping from the News Chronicle, Dr. Brennan opening family practice in our home, in our bungalow, for a year or two. We had a 3-bedroom bungalow. One of the bedrooms was their bedroom, the other was my brother and I had bunk beds, and the third bedroom was his office. And our neighbor was a handyman. He built a partition in our living room, and they had chairs. So I'd come home from grade 1 or 2 at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, whatever, and there'd be people sitting in our living room in chairs, like reading magazines, like a waiting room, to go down the hall to see Dr. Brennan. And then he rented office space on Pardo. And the office, I drive by it once in a while, there's still some doctor or some professional, because I can't make out the name, but so it's still used as a professional office of some kind. He bought his own office building on Oak Ridge in 1965, 108, and it's still there. It's still someone's doctor's. It's right adjacent to the Cedar Park Heights. And at that point, he wanted his own space, and he was able to afford to buy it was a home.
So where would he write his prescriptions to? Where would he send people mostly?
McDermott's. I brought a copy of, he still has, on the reverse of one of his, doctors have their own notepads with their, on the reverse side, I've posted it before, it's McDermott's Pharmacies. It's from the 50s with the Oxford number and 2 locations in Valois and Pointe-Claire or whatever.
Lyle Brennan, he was a good guy.
Yeah?
He was a good guy. Lyle Brennan, he was a good guy. He was an excellent doctor. Did house call after house call.
So how long did he practice for?
1956 to 1978. Got a phone call one day out of the blue from someone he'd gone to medical school with in Kingston, offering him a job. It was the head of medical services for all the penitentiaries in the Kingston area, of which there are a lot. At the time, he was just about to turn 60 or so, he was around, and he said, this kind of job offer doesn't come to people when they're 60 years old. And it was a big decision to sell 2 houses. He wanted to find a doctor to look after his patients, take over his practice, which he did. So he went down there and he built a house, he designed it, he had it built back.
You were already out of the house at that point?
Yeah, I was gone. My brother was downtown, so we were gone. Didn't like the job. He retired when he was 65. I went down. I was married then. They had going away. And within a year, he contracted, started to get sick, had tests, they contracted. He got diagnosed with a disease called multiple myeloma, which is a disease of the blood. And he's a doctor, he knew, and there's no cure, there's no, life expectancy is not long. And he declined over 2 years and finally passed away on his birthday.